Hi, I'm Michael Hartman.
I'm Naomi Liu.
And I'm Mike Rizzo. And this is OpsCast,
a podcast for marketing ops pros
and RevOps pros.
Created by the Mo Pros, the #1 community for marketing operations professionals.
Tune in to each episode as we chat with real professionals to help elevate you in your marketing operations career.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of OpsCast, brought to you by marketingops.com, powered by all those Mo Pros. I am your host, Michael Hartman, joined today by my one co-host, Naomi Liu, up in the hot country of Vancouver.
We are having a bit of a heat wave, although I don't know how hot it is for Mike where he's at in lovely Vegas, the desert.
Yeah, I don't know that I call it lovely. I'm not a fan of Vegas. They don't have me on their ads, so. But yeah, he's probably suffering as well. But that's all right. We'll make it through. All right. So for those of you who are longtime listeners, you probably know that I believe that there's a gap between marketing ops professionals out there who have analytics chops, if you will, especially in the marketing domain. So I'm excited to talk to our next guest. So our guest today is Shivani Bhatt. Shivani is currently Director of MarTech Solutions and Analytics at CloudFlare. Shivani has built and scaled marketing teams at Fortune 500s as well as high-growth SMBs. Prior to her MBA, she built S&P's first marketing ops team and growing that team from 3 to 6 in 1 year, so doubling. I want to talk about that even, and managing the firm's Marketo instance. After her MBA, she was brought in to Marketo directly to be by executive leadership to develop intellectual property for the company around how to use and productize marketing data and analytics and impact the firm's product-led motion as it aimed for an exit. There, she hired and scaled a team to do so. So shortly after the acquisition by Adobe, she pivoted her team and led Adobe's flagship data governance project. After that, she was at Zuora. She ran the strategic planning and analytics function, including the modeling and forecasting of pipeline targets, reporting on the attainment and down to BDR compensation. At CloudFlare, where she is now, she directs data solutions within the entire MarTech stack, which includes 26 plus platforms. I think they're slacking there, and analytics that flow from it. So I need to take a breath. Shivani, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. So we already talked before we started recording that we're all suffering through the heat as we're recording in late June. So we're all fighting through it. All right. So I think there's a lot of different ways we could start this. You've got a really interesting background. But I'd love for you to share maybe if there's any other like little bits of your career path that we didn't touch on with my little introduction there. Maybe like if there are certain people that were pivotal in some of your sort of steps along the way, or if there were just decisions that you made along the way that you felt like had sort of an outsized impact on your career. I think our audience would love to hear about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I can't take all the credit. I've had had the privilege of reporting to some really great folks in the past. Alex Fleming would be one of them. I currently report to Jess Cow, and just wow. It's been just such a huge learning experience to work with one of the industry's top thought leaders. So have to obviously call that out. And then, I would also like to mention I've had some really great professors, whether in undergrad or also in my MBA. So I would probably say folks like George Dorizo, Megha Kumar. They have just had a very outsized impact on the way that I think and the way that I approach problems. And I still keep in touch with all of them today to talk shop every now and then.
All right, we're gonna have to start bringing all of Jess' team on. We already had her on, so now she comes up regularly on these discussions. I was talking to a mentee of mine earlier this week, and I was like, that would be a good person for you to talk to. So yeah, that's great. All right, so as I kind of alluded to in kind of the intro, I really. In fact, I was talking to somebody earlier this week, just a few days ago, about what I see as a gap in understanding of analytics in the marketing context in particular, but we call it marketing and sales really. I see it as a pretty big gap. where I think there's some people who know how to pull a lot of reporting, but not really get insights out of them and not kind of see patterns. What's your take on that? Am I way off? Do you see something different? Like, what's your view of that space right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good question and a really good point. I think, I probably would view it as like a middle of the road place that we're in right now. I think folks are getting really good at understanding metrics and there's a lot of kind of homegrown knowledge that comes on analytics just from being in this space. But I do think the statistics one that you mentioned is kind of an interesting one. That's part of what I focused on in my MBA. And I think my take is that there's so many great statistical tools, and to try to be able to understand how they interact with marketing data is absolutely huge. And I would say if there's a gap, to me, it's kind of around that. Like we all know about kind of statistical significance, but like I think the concept of linear regression is really well suited for marketing data. It's got tons of different applications. I've built tools for and worked with my teams on providing those tools to different, BDR or sales audiences. And there's just so many different ways you can skin a cat essentially, with some of these statistical tools. So I think that that's an area where I would kind of see a gap. But I think there's lots of ways we can try to fill that gap.
I think it's interesting because I actually don't see a lot of people who know things like statistical significance. I know enough. Like I was talking about an analysis I did on a proof of concept project a couple of years ago, and I had 12 this is for an event thing. So 12 events that I was looking at, comparing 3 years worth of progression to see if we could identify any kind of trends from a change in how we were doing communications. And like 12 just didn't seem like enough, right? But I freely admitted that. And I just like, hey, even if the change looks to be this, even if it's half of that or, 25% of that, I still think it's still worth the investment in sort of doing it anyway. But I don't know that a whole lot of people that, but I like literally this week, I was watching someone, we were kind of talking about a project, and she was doing something in an Excel spreadsheet and she put median, mean, and I was like, oh, I'm so glad somebody else is using median. Right? I'm like I don't think I still see it because I've got kids who are in like high school age going through, whatever that would be, algebra 2, I think. Right. But they don't have statistics per se. And I feel like that's missing in education right now. I don't know.
I'm curious, Michael, if you think the gap exists with people who know how to create the reports or interpret the results, or do you think it's a mixture of the two? Like one person should be able to do both. And the reason I ask this is because I've worked for organizations where oftentimes the analytics function will roll up under the IT organization. So folks in finance, folks in HR, folks in marketing will go to the IT team and request certain reports to be pulled out of things like Power BI or Tableau or whatever, data modeling tool that they may have. And then they give the parameters and then they're presented with the results. But there's no actionable insights from that. The person who's creating the report is not then saying, ooh, that's not so great, never do that again, or you should really do more of this, right? And so I'm curious, like when you say that you see that there's a gap there, maybe I just kind of want to blow that out a bit.
No, I think that's a great question. So I do not see it as an issue with people being able to like run reports and pull data from these systems. I don't think that's really the issue. I think there's a little bit of like, how do you put data together from sort of different systems so that like that makes sense, right? I also think there's a lack of recognition sometimes about the movement in data that happens so quickly in sales and marketing that is like less so in say finance where there's lots of controls. So I think, like sometimes like you pull data and it's like, it's a point in time, It's not a trend, right? So to get the trend, you have to be looking at it at multiple points in time. Like that's one sort of little thing. The other, I would say, is really that last bit you were talking about, like getting insights. But I think part of that is because people don't actually know how to assess. I mean, Shivani, you brought up linear regression, which I know enough to be dangerous about, like what it's trying to do. I'm not sure that I could actually do one of those kinds of analyses. But you're trying to like hold everything else constant to see, is there some variable that has an outsized influence on output than others, right? I mean, I think that's the way to think about it. And I don't think people really would understand that. And so they misinterpret data because they don't understand sort of fundamentals of statistics. So the difference between median and mean and things like that. And they also don't understand about like the difference between correlation and causation. And I think very little we have from marketing and sales data could be causal. I mean, there's probably I'm sure there's scenarios we could think of that we go, yeah, this one thing changed, the outcome changed in the same time, like in a correspondent way. And you could say, yeah, that was probably causal. But in most cases, I think it's correlation because it's multiple things that are happening at once. The other thing is like just a recognition that marketing and sales data is just generally not going to be, quote, right. If it really like rubs me the wrong way. People will look at marketing and sales data reports or things that go, that's just not right. Because I think like, well, it may not be what you expected, but also recognize that there's a lot of ways in which people don't have discipline or whatever that cause problems with that data. So I think like there's a number of layers to it from my perspective, Naomi. But I don't think it's the like actual just like, can we get the data? It's like, once we get the data, how to do something with it that's meaningful on the other side where you can take action.
Hey everyone, Mike Rizzo here, CEO of MarketingOps.com and co-host of OpsCast. I've got a little secret to share with you, something that's been one of the best kept perks of our community until now. At MarketingOps.com, we've built a hiring program that's changing the game for marketing operations recruitment, and we're finally sharing it with the world. Our community is over 22,000 strong, and within that, we have over 4,400 members who are actively and passively seeking new opportunities. These are seasoned professionals with skills and experience spanning platforms like HubSpot, Pardot, Marketo, and so much more. Plus, we can help you fine-tune your outreach, targeting exactly the right candidates by region, years of experience, seniority level, or even agency experience. But here's the real cherry on top. When you hire through our program, your new team member gets a free membership or a virtual ticket to our annual conference. From day one, they're not just stepping into a new role, they're getting access to the training, networking, and support they need to hit the ground running. So if you're ready to unlock this incredible opportunity, it's time to let this secret out. Visit marketingops.com and find your next star teammate today. Thanks for listening, and as always, keep optimizing.
That makes sense. Yeah. No, it was just a point of clarification that I just wanted to kind of discuss, because I do think that that's something that a lot of people struggle with, myself included, right? It's that I will pull a lot of the reporting, I see the results, I make, as I best can, such like educated assumptions on what I think has been happening and what needs to happen. Because a lot of the tools that we use, they're either going to ingest data or they produce it, right? And so some of them do both. And when you have all of these moving pieces, sometimes it can be hard to pinpoint, okay, what exactly is moving the needle forward or back? And then the challenge that I have sometimes is, okay, there's a lot of stakeholders and business partners that we work with, senior leadership. How do we then effectively communicate in very succinct, short form what is happening and what we need to do? And sometimes that involves like monetary investment, sometimes it doesn't, right? So those are all kind of things that I feel like marketing ops people are constantly juggling. What the answer is, I don't know. If anyone knows, I would love to know.
I think that's true. So, Shivani, given my sort of monologue there of more detail, like, do you see the same thing? I mean, I know you probably not in your organization because you're there, right? But in other places that you've worked with, maybe when you were at Marketo with clients, curious, like, were you seeing that same kind of gap in terms of the ability to really find insights and value out of the data?
Yeah, and I have what is probably a controversial opinion on this topic. But as someone who's built dashboards, as someone who's run teams that build dashboards, as someone who's run teams that have statisticians or data scientists on them, like, I've seen a lot of the data. I've seen a lot of under the hood. And so while you both were mentioning your thoughts, I think two things occurred to me. The first is that I think what you said, Michael, about marketing and sales data and like kind of the cleanliness, like that was something that kind of picked up for me too, where we are never going to have a perfect clean data set. There's a lot of cleaning, transformation of data that we want to do in order to get the appropriate statistical results. And if it's not statistical, then it might be, we just want a clean data set. Like, that's a completely valid requirement and wish. And so I think it kind of split things into two categories for me, which is one, like, sometimes we don't actually have to over engineer. Like, sometimes if we're looking at movement through the funnel, for example, I'm a big proponent of, let's look at the conversion rate. Like, that kind of tells you everything you need to know. Whether it's conversion from one stage of the funnel to another, whether it's an MQL into an opportunity, whether it's a MQA or marketing qualified account into an opportunity. There's lots of metrics that we can use, and we can understand that the conversion rate is kind of the North Star in a lot of them. The second part of my perhaps controversial opinion is that I think oftentimes, and again, this is home for me, so I'm being very, I guess, vulnerable here. Is I think that there is this desire where everybody wants a dashboard and nobody knows what to do with one. Like, you get the dashboard and you're like, great, this is awesome. You did a really great job. This doesn't answer my question. And I guess I'm laughing because if I didn't, I would cry. And it's one of those things that I think is just really hard to get right. I want to leave room for that. Like, we're currently dealing with volumes, data sets. Like, we've never really had that type of data before. Even in the last 5 years, it's grown exponentially. You're talking about, if you're talking about an enterprise MarTech stack, that's 20 platforms, maybe more, maybe 30. And so it's a lot of data to manage and understand, like, what's happening in this point of the data architecture, and then what happens, how does it transform, how does it flow through, how does it change and plop into, a data warehouse, or then, into a dashboard, whether it's Power BI, Tableau, Looker, however you want to, whatever tool you're using there. And so my thought really is that I think beyond the standard, spiel of let's define requirements properly, so on and so forth. I think my thought process is, like, sometimes you don't actually need a dashboard. Like, sometimes what you need is a data set, and that's completely valid and fair, and I think it's about getting really creative. We all have had experiences in enterprise, or maybe we haven't, and that's okay too. But I try to keep a very non-judgmental approach of, like, just because it's not in a dashboard, does that mean that this isn't authoritative information? Like, does that mean that it's, if the data set's been cleaned, if it's been reviewed, if it's kind of followed a peer review process, if it comes from, the Salesforce extension, like, sometimes it's like, we know where the source is, we know the cadence, we know how it was cleaned, we know when it will be updated, and we know whether or not it's a snapshot. I think if you can kind of answer those questions, you're well on your way to having some data with which to make a decision, with which to draw insights. And I think it's sort of where a lot of marketers are craving that information. And it's also where I kind of see a lot of us kind of headed, where it's like, yes, this is in a dashboard, and that's where we get the big meaty questions, the executive questions answered. That's where we're building our run the business decks from. And also, like, we can't forget about the practitioners. And sometimes the best way to really understand the insight is kind of digging into it, yourself. And I think marketers are craving that. We're really smart. So that's my thought so far on that.
No, I mean, so what our audience can't see is that I've been vigorously nodding my head in agreement about like I'm not convinced dashboards are always, and because I've been in places where they request like we need a dashboard, and it takes forever just to define like all the different spots in the dashboard, what format they'll be, and I'm like, let's do one report and get it to where we want it. Then let's do the next report. And if eventually we get to enough where we say, well, we can actually, and people understand, like, then we want to put them all together in one place, fine, do a dashboard. But my experience has been that, like, if you go start trying to build a dashboard, you almost never get it done to the point where people actually want to use it or it's useful, to your point. But getting individual reports right that answers some questions specifically has been a lot more effective. And I would say the other thing is like, it's just like, when somebody asks a question and they usually ask for data, they don't actually ask they don't actually tell you sometimes what question they're trying to answer, right? So if you know what question they're going to answer, you can hopefully be not just a data dump. But I also think like what I've experienced is you do that the first analysis of a report or data analysis, and you find another question, right? So you go another, like there's this iterative process that happens of going deeper and deeper. And a lot of times, this is the other thing I would say about like a gap. I have a coaching client who recently we were talking about this, and I was like, one of the things that I've learned to do when I see data reports or whatever is there's almost always something that's like, like it's not in the pattern, right? There's an outlier of some sort. And everybody gravitates to that. And I said, if you're going to be presenting something like that to a set of stakeholders who aren't familiar, they're going to immediately see that because we're all sort of trained to be pattern recognition animals, right, as humans. And if you don't already know that they're going to ask, like you should be ready to answer the question, like, why is that one like that? Because there's usually a reason, like, oh, well, that we didn't code stuff on the campaign right, or like there's a calculation wrong in the spreadsheet, or whatever it is. But if you don't have the answer, people will start to question the quality of all the rest of it.
Absolutely. And I think that's where those guardrails are really important. Like if it is sort of I'm definitely of the mindset that there should kind of be one ring to rule them all, or maybe there's 3 main dashboards, or 2, or there's one main dashboard and there's, several tabs, and that answers, I think those types of practices are absolutely the best practice, and they're the best practice for a reason. But I think you're right. I think we're moving into an era perhaps in the industry where, it kind of feels appropriate in several types of questions of, as long as we can get the guardrails right and we know what this is being used for, and we define, what the limits are, like, don't share this to an executive audience if it's not from the main dashboard. But if it's someone, I get a lot of that, marketers just trying to answer a question. And I think it's really important to be aware, mindful, again, non-judgmental about that type of ask, and just kind of curious, open, honest of, okay, yeah, I see what you're trying to do. Here's an option. Here's a couple options. And sometimes those are data sets. They're not quite, and actually, maybe I should clarify. Like when I think of a data set, I think of, like it could be a Salesforce report. It could be, maybe even a Marketo report of some kind, or a marketing automation platform report. I think of it as like a smaller kind of bite-sized, like something that, a marketer can dig into, and kind of, they can create a pivot table. They can look at some, quick trends. And it's not, necessarily being used at broad scale or for a, highly scoped, broad scope question, but it is helping them understand what's going on in their campaign, or it's helping them understand like, great, so my next decision is, and I think that's where it's kind of, again, I've built dashboards, I've run teams that build dashboards, and like, I think it is a fall down. Like, I would tend to agree, in some cases with my stakeholders of like, this isn't quite what I needed. And I think we have to be kind of open and sensitive to that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you hit on something that I'm a big believer in too. In fact, it was a big part. I wrote a white paper for marketingops.com recently about marketing measurement and sort of 5 different ways of looking at marketing from a measurement standpoint. Although one, I would say people would probably go like, is that really measurement? But anyway, but I think the key part of the key is like, who's the data and who's that report intended for, right? So if you were to take that low level data and try to put it in front of an executive, right, probably the wrong audience. And so I think that's the other thing. Like, think about who this is for and how, like, make it easy for them to consume it. If it's not going to be easy for them to consume it, then you either you've got the wrong kind of report, or you need to think more about like, how do you take that and abstract it to a way that somebody who's not as familiar with the way the sausage is made, right, to consume it and understand what the implications are.
Yep.
So that's my thought. Okay. So if my assertion is right, and it sounds like there might be some question about it maybe, but that there's a gap, like how can people start to build up on some of those skills, to start to build those muscles, that skill, the experience, the knowledge for being able to take data and then turning it into actionable stuff. Not that everything has to be that way, but what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially around like closing knowledge gaps, I think is kind of where my head is. And I would encourage people to be scrappy, which, not everyone loves scrappy, and that's okay. But I think from my perspective, like, you don't necessarily need to go and like, I've gotten questions from friends in the industry or even coworkers of like, does this mean I need to go get my MBA now? Because, that's a pretty intense thing to do. And everyone's kind of at a different point on that one. And, oftentimes my answer is, if you want to do that, yeah, then great. Go do that. Go focus on, or, a master's in analytics or statistics or data science. Like, there's so many routes we can go now. But also if you've got a busy life, you're juggling work and family and all other types of commitments, I think there's lots of things you can do to kind of close gaps and try to view it as like a bingo card, essentially, of like, what's the bingo card of things you want to be able to do. And so I think one of the things there is just understanding like really basic functionality of Excel. And that feels like maybe like a 1990 answer, but I think from my perspective, it's actually really helpful. Like, that has been helpful for me to just like visualize. Like, I sometimes need to stop and pause and outline and kind of sort out like, what am I trying to do with this data before I just plunge into it, which is helpful too and great sometimes. But a lot of times we need to organize our thoughts and kind of outline the query or the, the process of what we're trying to get to, and understanding, like pivot tables, understanding a VLOOKUP, those kinds of things. And if you can kind of run in your head, like, this is what's happening. It's running down these columns. It's running down these rows, or it's formulating the data in these ways, I think is actually really foundational and very, very helpful to just understanding like what's happening in a massive, in like, if you're looking at something in a data warehouse, whether it's Snowflake or Databricks or a larger format, much, much, much larger format. But I think it's important. Like, it's easy to get overwhelmed by here's like the big massive thing, but we need to start small. Like, start small, review, kind of understand like what are like some things that you normally have to do, or analyses even that you do with marketing data. The other thing, and that I mentioned on a podcast several years ago that I was on, is marketing data is, I think foundationally, it's got lots of different types of data categories in it. It's got categorical variables, so they're not easily transferred into like a numerical value. It's got numerical variables, and sales data is a little bit cleaner in that respect. Like a lot of times, it's just deals, ACV, average contract size. We're looking, or average deal size. Like we're looking at numbers and things that can be very easily compartmentalized. But marketing data isn't always that way. We've got words, we've got letters, we've got things that we can't, you can't easily convert. And sometimes you can convert them, but you have to be mindful of that. And so I think it's like understanding those bits of, and kind of broader, not requirements, but like broader strokes of marketing data, and then arming yourself with like, okay, how does it work if I want to do this type of analysis or X or Y? And then those are the building blocks that you can then use when you're looking at something like a linear regression, which, if anyone doesn't know, I'll just mention it now. It's like the best way I've used to describe this is that it's kind of like the slope equation in high school, but like even fancier and better. And it kind of it's kind of a nice way of entry point of understanding what it's doing. But I think that it's like very easy to get overwhelmed. And I see marketers and people go down this rabbit hole of like, I got to do this big thing. And it's like, if you're going to just start to close some gaps, start small, and then you can kind of build to the bigger pieces.
Yeah. I mean, it's what's running in my head is like, there's sort of two categories of how to do it. Like one is like learning how to use the tools that we probably all have. Like probably everybody has Excel, or if they don't, they have Google Sheets, right? And there's a lot of overlap in there. And there's a lot of functionality that both have that most people probably don't take advantage of. And it takes time to figure that out, right? But there's tons of online. I was actually looking because my oldest was going to go into his freshman year in college and knew that he was going to have to start doing spreadsheets. I was starting to look for like stuff to help him train. Like Microsoft actually has a ton of really good like building blocks on how to use Excel. And I know there's other third-party stuff. The other one there's that. I think then the other category to me is the more, I guess, general kinds of knowledge. So statistics, linear regression, like more topical. And I found like I actually use this a lot with my kids as they like helping them. It's like Khan Academy is great, right? It has a ton of, it's free and it's actually really good at some stuff. Now they don't have everything, right? They may not have linear regression. I'm pretty sure they have basic statistics. And so if you don't know the basics of statistics, like go there. It's like, you'll probably learn something.
Yeah.
And
or Udemy or YouTube.
Yeah. I haven't used Udemy, but YouTube for sure. YouTube University. Someone said to me the other day. Oh, Naomi, can you think of any other, like, have you done this with any of your team or yourself? Like
what specifically?
Like found these, like, how have you learned or helped your team learn some of these things, or have you? I don't even know.
We kind of just learn as we go. Sometimes, like a lot of times, we will get questions where we kind of just let us get back to you. And then we convene as a team and we try to figure it out, whether it be asking our peers, whether it be, Googling for information, watching YouTube videos, finding resources online that other people have done the same or similar things. It really depends on what is being asked. I feel like a lot of, on the topic of reporting and analytics, a lot of the time it's kind of a hybrid for us, I would say, right? It's in the sense that sometimes we'll be asked to produce reports, and there's other times where we are creating reports based on things that we feel like people should know, right? Where there may be that gap on the business side where they don't know what they don't know. Mm-hmm. And we're like, hey, we're actually seeing XYZ, and here it is shown in a way that you may not have originally thought of, but I think it's important that you ingest this information, and here is why, right? And then those become standard sets of reports that the business uses.
That's great. I like that. I mean, then you're sort of sharing. We could all send emails to Shivani, right? When we get stuck on something.
Mm-hmm. How do you do this?
No, but I mean, but seriously, I mean, the marketing, the community is great for this.
I just asked ChatGPT.
Yes.
Or Perplexity. I've been really on that right now.
Well, okay, so you brought up the topic of AI, because I actually do. My prediction with AI is that this like current sort of big bump in seeing AI as sort of both a threat and a help to content for marketing, I think that's going to wane because of some of the, like, it's almost all centered around like ChatGPT type things. And I think the risks of like IP being lost by putting it in there and trying to generate content is going to make that slow down a little bit. I don't know if I'm right or not. But where I do see where it could have value fairly quickly, I mean, Shivani mentioned it, right? We're all generating just volumes and volumes of data every day that is really hard to do analysis on. I believe like the next wave, and some of this is a sum of a hope, is that the next wave of AI implications is going to have beyond data analytics for marketing, because I think it could churn through a lot more data faster, and it can kind of find the patterns that it's finding that like individual humans would have to take time to pull the right set of data, do the analysis, test a hypothesis, not right. There's just not enough time. Now, to me, that also implies that you still need people who can interpret the output of that. And so I still think there's the need for that. So I wasn't just rolling my eyes at AI. I think I was, but it was just, I mean, I don't think it's going to eliminate the need to have people who can understand it and interpret what comes out of those.
I think it's more supplementation rather than full direct replacement or automation, right? I feel like it's going to become a really important integral part of their day-to-day in the business that, it'll be like a tool, right?
What's your thought on that, Shivani?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm quite aligned. I think, if it's a question of replace, I don't think, call me crazy, but I don't think we would get into like a replacement territory, but I think there will be a little bit of displacement while we're getting used to the new normal. Like, I think one place where AI will be very, very helpful is in that, like, we need an initial data set. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect, but we do need something to iterate with. And if it's going to take a human tons of time, 4 hours to pull it, and like, did I get all the filters right? Did I get all the stuff right? Like, I think I see kind of a path of operationalizing that pretty quickly, especially with all of us who like it was funny. My husband, the other day, we were at this like happy hour and with some work friends, and we were saying like, do your spouses know marketing terminology? And I looked at him and I was like, do you know any? And he goes, MQL. And I was like, okay, great. So you hear me say that enough. But I think, that's like a great example. Like we all know our metrics pretty well. We're developing new ones. But I think that sorry if there's some background noise there, but I think that the kind of piece there is like, once we get to, okay, this is kind of the operational piece. Like, we know that we need something to iterate on. We all know, and a lot of our stakeholders know our terminology. And I think AI can be really helpful in determining like, here's your starting point. Here's the standard starting point, that you want to move from. And then the rest of it is kind of a Candyland map of like, I think we're going to see a lot of creativity around how to use AI, how to create prompts. Like, the creativity portion, I think, is still very critical. And and helpful. And I think that that's where my opinion is we would see folks leaning in, which is nice because I think that's what we all kind of want to do anyways. Like it's nice to be able to focus some more creative energy than it is to maybe be slogging through a data set that could maybe be generated quickly.
No, I think that's right. It doesn't necessarily eliminate the need. It sort of shifts what you need to work on to stuff that I think in general most people would find more interesting and challenging. So, but look, we're all pretty terrible about making predictions. Like, so who knows what it's going to be? But like I said, I'm kind of hopeful that that's going to be the case, right? Because I think with that, like, sort of the challenge of not having that the skills to really interpret it, kind of pull together, interpret, analyze data that I see, plus just like the amount of time it takes to do it well. So even if you have that skill set and you don't have the time to do it, right, it's going to be a challenge to get any value out of that. So if there's things that can help that, right, we help drive people who are going to be able to interpret the data, and then we have the tools that make that happen in the background so that you're able to make progress on other things that are, I don't even want to say more of a priority, but like time sensitive, then I think there's some value there. That's my hope, at least. And then like the Terminator will come and we'll all be dead.
I just watched I can't remember which one. It was one of the newer ones last night. So that's so funny. Yeah.
Like sometime in the last year I watched Terminator 2 with all of my kids. It was the one that was on Netflix or whatever. I couldn't get the first one. So I think we went back and watched it.
But they're like, wow, the CGI is so bad. That was an explosion? What was that?
I think that's what our kids are going to tell us about, our data sets that AI created for us right now.
Right? It's going to be crazy.
Yeah. 20 years from now. Oh, Mom, that's a silly data set. I can't believe that was an explosion.
I mean, I still remember Y2K being a big thing, and that was only 25 years ago.
Yeah.
So that was a big deal. And
I thought you were only 23, Michael.
Much Ado About Nothing. Something like that. Some multiple
totally
of that.
Missed that.
I missed it? No, I didn't. Yeah. Oh, I get it. No, I get it. Really funny. All right. Joke's on me. All fair. All right. So is there any other, are you seeing anything or hearing about anything, Shivani, that's going on with data and AI platforms? I'm hearing bits and pieces, and there's a couple of people I talked to who are closer to it, but like I said, I'm hopeful, but I haven't heard of any specific tools. I have heard about a tool that someone's working on that does involve doing something like attribution, but using a regression analysis type of approach as opposed to traditional attribution, which I think is interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I think the one that comes to mind that I think probably for you all too is like Stack Moxie. Like they're doing some really, really great work, and I think they're probably the main one I would call out in terms of just how well thought out the marketing use cases and like how there's just so much great documentation and like I think if you want to if that's quite honestly where I go. Like if I'm trying to think through, here's my whole architecture and like here's the thing I'm trying to solve. Like here's the use case. I think they just have a really nice framework, marketing specific. I've seen a couple really interesting case studies. OpenAI, I think there's some really great use cases and like thought and even like kind of straw mans being built out from that. Workato is another one. We just had a Marketo user group a few weeks ago at the Workato office in Denver, where Michael Van walked us through kind of how he's using AI in workflows, and it's really, really fantastic. I think the next place that I did do a bit of research before before this to try to sort out if I could find like I was like, is there a vendor that is doing this thing that I think I would think would be really helpful? And so it's not quite AI, or maybe not yet, but one that I would shout out is RollStack. And I think it's around a use case that's probably I don't know the word, near and dear, maybe like also could bring up some like, oh God, like some anxiety. I don't know, but is slide decks. Like, I think that's another area where it's so important to have visuals, and like we want to be able to communicate clearly. And I think oftentimes for executives, that's kind of the format that they're looking for. And so I could see there being, especially with a tool like RollStack, where it's integrated with your, Power BI, Tableau, and it's just kind of automatically creating you some slides. I don't know if you all ever watched Dave Chang's Netflix show Ugly Delicious, but if not, I would recommend it. And he has a point in there he makes about like he loves food that's like DIY, homemade. It's food that's like you're not going to find in a fancy restaurant. It's not like picture perfect. It's ugly, but it's delicious. It's got good nutritional value. And like that's kind of my thought process too on a lot of how I think AI platforms, tools will start to develop in this space, because I think again it's like we all need a place to start. Sometimes starting is the hardest part. It's easy to kind of get distracted when you've got chats and pings and emails and texts and calls from daycare, whatever, coming in. And so I think that that's going to be a value add of like, we started the slide deck. Is it perfect? No. Is it ugly delicious? Probably. And we can start to iterate from there. You can take it and run. And I think that's, like I said, I didn't see AI mentioned on RollStack's website. So I don't necessarily want to call them out as such, but it's like tools like that I see as like, okay, this could be a really great potential here.
Interesting. Ugly Delicious. I'm going to go add that to my Netflix queue now. Go check that out. I love that. Wow. My head is spinning now. So Shivani, this has been great. We covered a lot of ground, and all of a sudden it's like we're almost at a point where we have to wrap up. But is there anything that you wanted to make sure our audience heard today that we didn't talk about?
I think for maybe, one item I would say that I kind of mentioned in a lot of different formats is, I think as like marketing ops and analytics people, it's really important to just stay grounded and like empathetic. Like I think for me, one of I've had people come to me before and kind of be like, I know you're really smart and you get this, but I don't. And if someone's saying that to me, I'm like, oh God, I've failed. Like, I don't want that to be the case. I don't want people feeling like I have this information and they don't. And it's just like, I think that's kind of my takeaway, even with all of this, is like, I think there's lots of great ways to partner with stakeholders, to partner with different functions. And not that it's always like perfect and I don't know, kumbaya, but I think like having that empathy and having that kind of curiosity and openness is really, really important, especially in this phase moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out. All right. So Shivani, we are about to wrap up. If folks want to keep up with what you're doing or connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
You can find me on LinkedIn.
All right. LinkedIn it is. I think like 99% of our guests say that. That's okay. Awesome. Thank you so much, Shivani. This has been great. Love this conversation. I hope our audience takes it to heart, and those who feel like they've been intimidated from all this stuff found some nuggets here to go build their knowledge. All right, Naomi, as always, enjoy being with you here. It's fun times. I wish it was cooler here,
all the
but
time,
it's not.
Obviously, right? Oh.
Always in my 23 years.
In your 23 years, that's right.
Yeah. Yes. All right. Well, thanks also to our audience. Thanks for supporting us, providing your feedback and any suggestions on topics or guests, or if you want to be a guest, have a topic, please let us know. We are available on LinkedIn, on the marketingops.com Slack, or the marketingops.com website. Until next time, everyone, bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.